Ruth sat on the cold steps outside a bakery in New York City. Her coat was too thin and her shoes had holes in the bottom. People walked past her without looking. Some looked away. Some stared like she didn't belong. But Ruth didn't mind. She held her blanket close. It was old and torn, but it smelled like lavender and reminded her of better days. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. But Ruth didn't beg. She never begged. She just hoped that maybe someone would offer her something warm today. As she sat there, she watched the world move fast around her. Taxis honked. People talked loudly on phones. No one slowed down. Until she heard crying. It wasn't loud at first. Just a soft sob. Ruth looked around, confused. Then she saw her, a little girl, sitting on the sidewalk near a tree, her hands over her face. She was wearing a red coat and sparkly shoes. One of the shoes was missing. Her knee was bleeding. Ruth stood up, heart beating fast. She walked over slowly. "Hey, sweet girl," she said gently. "Are you hurt?" The girl looked up. Her cheeks were wet with tears and her lips trembled. I fell," she whispered. "And I can't find my daddy. He was just here and then he was gone." Ruth knelt beside her. She saw the cut on the girl's knee and winced. It looked painful. She reached into her coat and pulled out a piece of her blanket. She tore it carefully and wrapped it around the girl's knee. "It's okay," Ruth said softly. "You're safe now. I'm here." The girl nodded, but her tears kept coming. "My name is Beth," she sniffled. "My dad is Bernard Montana. He was on the phone and I chased a balloon, then I tripped." Ruth didn't know who Bernard Mont was. She only cared that the girl was hurt and scared. "Don't worry, Beth. We'll find your dad. You just hold my hand, all right?" Beth held her hand tightly. Across the street, inside a black car, a man sat frozen. He had just stepped out of a big business meeting when he noticed something strange. His daughter was gone. Panic struck him like lightning. He ran out into the street, shouting her name, looking everywhere. Then he saw her with a woman he didn't know. A woman with dark skin, old clothes, and a kind face. She was wrapping something around Beth's knee and whispering something calming. Bernard Mont sat still, watching. His security guard, Sam, stood by the car, ready to rush over. But Bernard held up his hand. "Wait," he said. "Let's see what she does." He expected the woman to ask for money or run. But she didn't. She just sat there, holding Beth's hand like a mother would. Bernard couldn't speak. Something in his chest twisted, something he hadn't felt in years. Back on the sidewalk, Ruth helped Beth stand. "Let's see if we can find your dad. He must be looking for you." Beth nodded. "You're nice," she said. "You smell like flowers." Ruth laughed a little. "That's my blanket. It's special." Just as they turned the corner, Bernard stepped out of the car. "Beth," he shouted, his voice shaking. Beth's eyes lit up. "Daddy." She ran to him and he scooped her up in his arms. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Beth pointed to her knee. "I fell, but the nice lady helped me. She made it stop bleeding." Bernard turned toward the woman. But Ruth was gone. He looked around. The sidewalk was full of people again. He ran a few steps searching. But there was no sign of her. She had disappeared. That night, Bernard couldn't sleep. He stared at the security camera video his team had pulled from nearby stores. The footage showed the woman sitting with Beth, wrapping her knee, holding her hand. "Zoom in," he said to his assistant. "I need a clearer picture." The woman had kind eyes. Tired, but kind. She didn't look for a reward. She didn't even wait for thanks. "Find her," Bernard said. "Whatever it takes." But no one could. No one knew her name. The image was too blurry. The trail was cold. Meanwhile, Ruth walked down a quiet alley. Her heart was full and heavy at the same time. She was glad Beth was safe. But she knew people like Bernard. Rich men in suits. They didn't see people like her. She was just a shadow in their world. She found a corner behind an old bookstore and curled up under her blanket. The part she'd torn off was missing, but she didn't regret it. That little girl needed it more than she did. In the following days, Bernard became obsessed. He asked every store owner, every street vendor. "Do you know this woman?" he asked, showing the picture. "She helped my daughter." Most shook their heads. A few remembered a woman with kind eyes, but no name. No one knew where she stayed. "She could be anywhere," his assistant said. "She might not want to be found." But Bernard couldn't let it go. He wasn't just thankful, he was curious. Who was this woman? Why would someone with so little give so much? He sat in his office looking out at the city. Below, people hurried by like tiny ants. He had built buildings, bought companies, and made billions. But in all his years, he had never seen something so powerful, so real as what that woman did for his daughter. It haunted him. And it inspired him. 1 week later, Ruth stood in line at a soup kitchen. Her stomach ached again. She hadn't found a new coat yet and the wind cut through her sleeves. "Hey," a voice said behind her. She turned around. A woman with curly red hair smiled at her. She wore jeans and a name tag. "My name's Clara," the woman said. "I work with a place called Fresh Start. We help people who've lived on the street get back on their feet. Would you like to come by?" Ruth looked at her, unsure. "Is it a shelter?" "It's more than that," Clara said kindly. "It's a place where people care." Ruth didn't believe in miracles, but something in Clara's voice made her nod. That night, she walked into Fresh Start. It smelled like fresh bread and soap. The walls were bright. People smiled at her. Not like she was a problem, but like she was a person. She cried. No one stared when she cried. Clara brought her tissues. Another woman offered her tea. For the first time in years, Ruth felt seen. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change. And somewhere in a tall building, Bernard Mont stared at a photo of Ruth, now clearer than ever. He smiled softly. He had found her. But what he didn't know was that Ruth was about to find something, too. Something deep inside the company he built. Something ugly. And she wouldn't stay silent. Not this time. Ruth sat by the window at Fresh Start. She had a warm sweater on, and her hair was neatly braided. Felt strange. Like wearing someone else's life. She had her own bed now. Her own toothbrush. People greeted her by name. Some even hugged her. But something inside Ruth stayed careful. She knew life could turn fast. One moment you're safe, the next you're back on the street. So she stayed quiet, watched and helped where she could. She cleaned tables, folded laundry, and even helped other women write letters to their families. Clara, the red-haired woman, watched Ruth closely. "You're a natural helper," she said one day. "Would you like to volunteer more? Maybe even part-time work?" Ruth nodded. Felt good to feel needed. One morning, Clara knocked on her door. "There's someone here to see you," she said, eyes full of mystery. Ruth froze. "Who?" "He says his name is Bernard Montana." Ruth's heart skipped. She stood up slowly. "The girl's father?" Clara nodded. "He said he just wants to thank you." Ruth followed Clara down the hallway. Her palms were sweaty. She didn't know what to expect. When she stepped into the room, there he was. Bernard Montana wearing a suit that probably cost more than everything Ruth had ever owned. But his eyes weren't cold. They looked soft, nervous even. He stood up. "Ruth," he said, "I finally found you." Ruth blinked. "How do you know my name?" "I asked around," he said with a gentle smile. "It took weeks. But I needed to thank you. You helped my daughter when I couldn't. You didn't know her. You didn't know me. And still, you gave everything you had." Ruth didn't know what to say. She just looked at the floor. "I've brought something," he said. "For you." He placed a small box on the table. Inside was a gold necklace with a tiny flower charm. "Beth picked it. She says it smells like your blanket." Ruth smiled a little. "Tell her thank you." Bernard sat down. "I'd like to do more. Not just gifts. I run Mont Enterprises. Maybe you've heard of it." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "The glass towers? The ones with the gold lions outside?" He chuckled. "Yes, that's us. I want to offer you a chance to work there. Anything you're interested in. You have a kind heart. And sharp eyes." Ruth hesitated. "I don't belong in a place like that." "Maybe that's exactly why you do," Bernard said. She said she'd think about it. 2 weeks later, she stepped into the glass doors of Mont Enterprises. Her clothes were borrowed from Fresh Start, her shoes a little tight, but she walked tall. Bernard met her in the lobby. "Ready for a tour?" he asked. She nodded. The building was shiny and busy. People in suits rushed by. Phones rang. Screens blinked. It felt like a whole other world. Bernard introduced her to different departments: marketing, design, finance. Everyone smiled politely. But Ruth could feel it. The stares. The questions behind their eyes. Who is she? Why is she here? She kept walking. At the top floor, Bernard showed her a quiet office. "We've been looking into community programs," he said. "I want you to help lead one. We'll call it Project Handkerchief." Ruth laughed. "After the piece of my blanket?" He nodded. That small act, it changed everything. Ruth accepted. She worked hard. She stayed late. She studied reports, met with schools, even visited shelters. She was determined to help others like her. But the more she looked, the more she saw something troubling. Behind the smiling posters and glossy brochures, something felt wrong. She met James Peterson, the director of diversity and inclusion. He wore expensive watches and spoke with a perfect smile. But when Ruth asked about hiring more women from shelters, he brushed her off. "We already meet the minimum," he said. "No need to shake things up." "But shouldn't we do more than the minimum?" Ruth asked. He just looked at her. "You're new. Let's not make waves." Ruth's stomach turned. She started asking quiet questions. She spoke to janitors, assistants, even interns. And slowly, the truth came out. People of color weren't promoted. Women weren't heard. Promises were made in public but broken behind closed doors. One night, Ruth stayed late. She slipped into the storage room where old boxes were stacked. She found papers, memos, emails, reports. Her hands shook as she read them. James Peterson had blocked promotions. He had erased complaints. He had even changed numbers in reports to make the company look fairer than it was. Ruth sat down, the folder in her lap. She had worked so hard to survive. So hard to do good. And here it was again, power used to silence people like her. She took the folder and walked home. At Fresh Start, she showed Clara. Clara read everything, then looked up. "What will you do?" "I'm going to speak," Ruth said, "even if my voice shakes." Clara nodded. The next morning, Bernard called Ruth into his office. "I heard you've been asking questions," he said. "James is concerned." Ruth looked him in the eye. "He should be." She placed the folder on his desk. He opened it. Read in silence. Page after page. His face changed. Anger. Shame. Shock. This can't be real," he whispered. "It is," Ruth said softly. "I trusted you. You said you wanted real change. But your company is hiding something ugly." Bernard sat back, hand on his head. "I didn't know. But now you do," Ruth said. There was silence. Finally, Bernard spoke. "We have the Diversity and Inclusion Conference next week. I want you to speak there." Ruth stared. "Me? Why?" "Because you're the truth," he said. "And the truth is what we need." She was scared. But she said yes. The week passed like a blur. Ruth wrote her speech late at night. She practiced in the mirror. Her voice trembled. But her eyes were strong. The day of the conference, the room was packed. Reporters. Employees. Cameras. James Peterson stood on stage first. He smiled, told jokes, and shared perfect numbers. The crowd clapped. Then Bernard stepped up. "We've heard enough of what looks good," he said. "Now it's time for the truth. Please welcome Ruth." Ruth walked slowly to the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces. Her hands shook. Her knees felt weak. Then she saw Beth sitting in the front row holding a flower necklace. And Ruth began to speak. Ruth stood in front of the microphone, her hands a little shaky. The big room was full. Lights were bright. People in fancy suits sat at long tables. Cameras were filming. Some were whispering. Some looked confused. But Beth sat in the front row, smiling at her. That gave Ruth courage. She took a deep breath. "My name is Ruth," she said clearly. "Some of you may have seen me before. Most of you haven't. But you've walked past me." People looked at each other. "For a long time I was homeless," she continued. "I slept on benches, in alleyways, and behind old buildings. I used a blanket that smelled like lavender to keep warm at night. That same blanket helped stop a little girl's knee from bleeding. Her name was Beth." A few gasps in the room. Ruth nodded slowly. "When I helped Beth, I didn't know who she was. I didn't know her father was one of the richest men in the city. I only knew she needed someone. And I helped." She paused. "That one small act brought me here. To this stage. To this company. To this truth." Now the room was completely silent. "I was invited to work on something called Project Handkerchief," Ruth said. "To help people like me. People forgotten. People judged. People who just need a hand." She opened the folder and held up the pages. "But what I found while working here was something else." She read from one of the emails. It showed James Peterson had blocked a woman's promotion just because she didn't fit the image. Another page showed how he ignored complaints from staff about unfair treatment. He even erased numbers to make the company look more diverse than it really was. Gasps again. Some people covered their mouths. Others looked at James, who sat frozen in his seat, lips tight. "This isn't just a mistake," Ruth said, her voice steady now. "It's a pattern, a system, a lie." She turned to Bernard. "I believed you when you said you wanted change. Now I'm asking you, will you do it?" The whole room looked at Bernard. He stood slowly. I didn't know these things were happening, but I believe Ruth, and I take responsibility. From this moment on, everything changes. He looked at James Peterson. You're suspended, and an investigation will begin today. James stood up, face red. You can't do this to me. I just did, Bernard said calmly. Security entered the room. James looked around, but no one stood with him. He left the room without another word. Bernard turned to the crowd. We can't fix what we won't face. But today we face it. And Ruth will lead the way. The crowd stood and clapped. Some cheered. Some cried. Beth ran onto the stage and hugged Ruth tight. You were amazing, she whispered. Ruth hugged her back, tears in her eyes. You helped me be brave. That day, everything changed. Ruth was given a full-time job as Director of Community Impact. She worked with schools, shelters, and churches. She made sure people from all walks of life had a voice in the company. She didn't forget where she came from, and she never let others be forgotten either. Mont Enterprises launched new programs, real ones. They gave jobs to people from the streets. They listened to workers who had been ignored. They funded education for girls in low-income areas. And they created safe homes for single mothers with children. One of the biggest projects was named Project Handkerchief. It helped people who had lost everything find their place again, just like Ruth. People across the city talked about the woman who once had nothing, who helped a crying child and changed a company forever. News stations shared her story. Teachers read it to students. Little girls wore lavender necklaces in her honor. Bernard changed too. He stopped just making money and started making meaning. He apologized to his staff, fixed broken systems, and even opened a new building, the Ruth Center for Housing and Healing. And every week, Ruth visited Fresh Start. She didn't forget the nights she had nothing. She didn't forget the cold, or the hunger, or the stares. But now, when she saw someone sleeping on a bench, she sat beside them. She listened. She helped. And she handed them a soft, lavender-scented handkerchief. Because that's how her story began. And how every story of kindness should begin with someone who sees you. With someone who cares. With someone like Ruth. Moral of the story. This story teaches us that kindness is powerful. Even a small act, like helping a crying child, can change lives. Ruth didn't have much, but she had a kind heart. She showed that you don't need money or fame to make a big difference. The story also reminds us to speak the truth, stand up against unfair treatment, and always believe that change is possible. No one is too small to bring light into a dark place. And no one should ever be judged by where they come from, but by the love they carry in their heart. Thank you so much for reading. A homeless black woman helps a crying girl, not knowing her billionaire dad was watching from afar. This story was written with love to remind every child and grown-up that kindness matters. No matter who you are or where you start in life, your voice, your actions, and your heart can inspire change. Thank you for believing in stories that uplift, heal, and bring hope to the world. Keep being kind. Keep being brave. Keep being you.